Hi, this is Dr. Sana Hashmi, and this week in my Prince Eye on China column, I analyze the Quad Foreign Ministers meeting that was held on July 29th in Tokyo. And in the column, I highlighted the Chinese views of the meeting and the grouping as a whole that comprises of Australia, India, Japan, and the United States. So the foreign ministers meeting that was concluded earlier this week focused on regional security and stability. There was a lot of focus on the Indo-Pacific, the security of the region, as well as what these countries could do to enhance their stability in the region. So, since its revival in 2017 and 18, the four Quad countries have emphasized that their cooperation is not aimed at any specific country. But despite their reassurance, there is no denying that China, or more precisely, the China threat, is at the center of the Quad, the revival of the Quad. So now coming to the meeting's joint statement, like before, there was no direct reference to China, but China is actually written all over the joint statement with the four countries urging countries, specifically China, of course, it wasn't mentioned, but we know that it was China, to avoid dominance or coercion and manage competition responsibly. And among other issues, the joint statement also expressed concerns about the East as well as the South China Seas, as well as they condemn the unilateral actions that are altering the status quo in the region through force or intimidation. They also criticize the militarization of the South China Sea. Then, of course, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs denounced this statement and condemned the grouping as an exclusive group that is engaging in scaremongering, that is inciting antagonism and confrontation. And the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson also said that the Quad and the countries are actually hindering the development of other countries in the region. So now coming to the Chinese views of the Quad, the official view has significantly changed over time, specifically since the revival of the Quad. When it was revived in 2017-18, Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, famously called the Quad a headline-grabbing idea and the sea form in the Pacific and Indian Ocean that is going to disappear soon. But a few years later, specifically after the COVID 19 pandemic, as well as the elevation of the grouping at the leadership level, specifically by 2020 2021, the Chinese official stand on the grouping has also changed. Now, in 2020 and 21, Wang Yi started criticizing the grouping. He called it as a tool of the US hegemony and accused the US of reviving the War mentality as well as the bloc confrontation. Then, over the years, the Chinese insecurities and anxieties regarding the Quad has grown. The discourse that is coming out of China regarding the grouping tells us that they would establish any narrative but accept that the four countries have genuine concerns regarding China and that it has failed to address the concerns of the countries, particularly India. Then, much of the strategic community in China has believed that the Quad is just not an anti-China grouping. It is also something that is not in the favor of other regional countries, and it's actually undermining, for example, ASEAN centrality that is at the core of the four countries Indo-Pacific strategy. And in fact, that in my view is completely a wrong view, given all the four countries individually as well as within the grouping have placed the ASEAN centrality at the center of their Indo-Pacific policies as well as their approaches to the Quad. Even the recent joint statement mentioned that the ASEAN centrality is at the core of the Quad. Then another view about the Quad is that it only exists to serve the US interest and to promote the US bloc driven policies and Cold War mentality. That is a narrative that has been propagated by the Chinese side. And in my view, this is also a flawed view. The Quad, contrary to the perception in China, is not actually the US led. The Quad exists because it serves the interest and addresses the concerns of all the four countries. And in fact, if we really have to give credit to one country, I think it would be Japan and not really the US. Um, while there is not much discussion on other Quad countries' rationale behind their participation, their active role in the Quad, a minor section, particularly on Weibo, has discussed India's role and willingness to play an active role in the Quad. Then the discussion is not really about India's own problems, India's own concerns with China, but a post on Weibo suggested that India is enthusiastic about the Quad and more narrowly on the foreign ministers' meeting is because it wanted to address the concerns, the anxieties of other Quad members regarding India, specifically after Prime Minister Modi's recent visit to Russia. Then on Weibo, at least there is more discussion about the ASEAN foreign minister meeting and Wang Yi's visit to Laos and his meeting with the Indian foreign minister than the Quad itself. And I believe this lack of focus on the Quad foreign minister meeting, specifically on social media, particularly on Australia and India within the Quad, are because of two main reasons. The first is that the revival of the Quad is often attributed to the US and Japan interest vis-a-vis the region, vis-a-vis China, and with the recent US Japan 2.2 meeting that coincided with the Quad Foreign Minister meeting as well, it was seen as an effort by both countries to amplify the China threat narrative. And it was an attempt to portray this is what they believe, that China is the region's and these countries' biggest strategic challenge. And the second reason is that by on the social media, by the state-owned media, by downplaying India and Australia's contribution and their role and willingness to play an active, proactive role within the Quad, the narrative suggests that these countries are more concerned with resolving their own bilateral issues and they are less committed to the Quad than how it is commonly perceived. This also implies that from China's perspective, Australia and India are still seen as more amenable compared to the US and Japan. From China's perspective, these are the countries that perhaps still considered as weaker links than in comparison to the US and Japan. Then, when China talks about the Quad, they often downplay the roles of the individual countries involved. They focus mostly on the US and see other members as just tool in the US broader Indo-Pacific strategy, and it's something that is just a coalition by the US allies and partners to counter China in the Indo-Pacific region. And I feel that this view misses how crucial Australia and, in particular, India are in making the Quad work and behind the success of the Quad as well. And that China's view shows that they don't really get how the Quad operates. It's not just about the US. The success of the Quad also depends on all the four countries playing active and important roles, of course, with Australia and India being key players now. Then I do believe that China's understanding and how it is perceiving Quad is definitely a little bit flawed by not fully appreciating the roles of the regional countries, particularly India. China is definitely making a strategic error in how it is viewing the Quad and how it is handling its relationship with these countries. Then, in fact, the Quad exists primarily because of India. The tripartite cooperation between US, Japan, and Australia have existed for decades. So definitely the reason behind the Quad existence today is India. It is India's ability to counterbalance China that we have the Quad today. And as China keeps challenging the Quad members and ignoring their concerns, I believe that these countries are becoming more and more committed to the idea of the Quad and more committed for Quad to push back against China's aggression and assertiveness. And as India Foreign Minister Jaishankar said at the Foreign Minister meeting, that the Quad is here to stay and grow. And this is a reality that China has to make peace with now. Thank you. I end here and I see you next week.